Ironing is probably one of the most important parts of sewing, and yet it's so often overlooked. I mean, I don't even always show ironing in my own videos because I feel like it's maybe an obvious step, but good ironing can really make your pieces go from homemade to handcrafted. So today I'm going to talk about my subtle ironing habits that I've built up over the years that make me really proud of my finished sewing projects. So you really should be ironing after you sew every single seam. But the tip that I want to give you is to first press your iron down on the seam flat to set the seam, and then after you set that seam, then you press your seam in the direction that you want. For the ironing haters, it might seem like I'm doubling your ironing time for no reason, but setting your seam is so important because it really lets the fibers relax in their new position. Then when you press your seam in the direction that you actually want it to lay, it's gonna sit in that new position flatter and your seam will just be more crisp. Ooh, when you get things to sit so nice and flat and crispy, it just is so satisfying for the truly iron pilled. And as for the direction of which you should be pressing your seam, typically I press my side seams towards the back and I press my horizontal seams downwards. And then I also press my vertical seams such as darts towards the center. But if you're following a pattern, it should tell you which direction to press your seams in. By the way, going back to when I was talking about lifting your iron up and down, the reason why we're pressing in that way is because wiggling your iron at this stage when your fabric isn't fully sewn up can really misshape your cut pieces. So you want to be careful with the way you're applying this heat. Think about your iron as molding your clothes as you go. So you want to use your heat and steam kind of strategically. So speaking of using your heat strategically, definitely you want to make sure that you're using the correct heat setting. So your iron will probably tell you on the little heat dial in the back, but you want to use low for synthetic or silk, medium for a polyester blend or wool, and high for linen or cotton. And if you don't know what your fiber is, or you just want to double check that you have the right heat setting, you can always do a test patch with the edge of the fabric and then just keep adjusting the heat higher until you notice that the creases are coming out of your fabric very easily. And I'll just throw in this little hack if you're an impatient beginner and you want beautiful projects right from the start. Just make all your projects in a woven cotton and press your fabric in between every single step with your iron on high. I'm sure your project will come out beautifully crispy and look really professional even though you're a beginner. And that just makes everything super satisfying. I'm not a beginner, but I absolutely love working with a woven cotton or a linen instead of an annoying slippery fabric. And then since we're talking about heat, we also need to talk about the opposite of that, which is cooling things down. If you are struggling with getting your fabric super crisp after ironing, you might want to just try leaving it alone and letting it cool down. While the fabric cools off, it'll set in place. So if you are immediately moving your fabric around while it's still warm, you might be creasing your fabric on accident. Also, you want to iron your fabric after pre-washing but before cutting out your pattern pieces. Some people might be skipping this step, but it's super important. The reason why people might be skipping this stage is because it's honestly annoying, and I definitely understand. It can be kind of difficult to press out so much fabric on a traditional ironing board. So this is where I find that previous tip to really help. Letting things cool off on the ironing board as I press actually helps everything set nice and flat. And then I also try to remember that this doesn't have to be absolutely perfectly flat. I'm just trying to flatten out the creases of this fabric so that when I go to cut out my pattern pieces, it can be a little bit more accurate. Also, I've said this before, but I want to say it again in this video in case this is the first video you're watching from my channel. but you do not need an expensive iron. I do like the Rowenta brand, and that's just because that's what my mom uses in her professional alterations business. Of course, she uses the professional version of that iron with the big water tank, but you can even use a cheap iron with a spray bottle for water, and that's just as good. And then in this section of the video, I'm not really talking about tips, but these are 3 tools that could help you for specific projects. So pressing cloth is great for delicate fabrics or anything that you don't want to press with direct heat because you're afraid that something might melt or something like that. And instead of buying a real pressing cloth, you can also just use a scrap piece of cotton or muslin. And a clapper can help you get super crispy seams. I actually don't own one, but I have been thinking about getting one. I know that a lot of quilters use this because it can help your patchwork lay nice and flat. And then this tool I actually have ready to show you. It is a pressing ham. You want to use a pressing ham whenever you're pressing curves. So when we talked about your iron shaping your fabric, that's why a pressing ham is important. You want to press your curves around a pressing ham to really set those curves around like a bust line really well. And if you don't have a pressing ham, you can actually use a 100% cotton towel rolled up for a similar effect. And then one bonus tip from my mom who just texted me. I was asking her if she had any ironing tips because she is a professional, and she said that it's very important to keep your iron clean. So she recommended Easy Off Iron Cleaner. That's what she uses to clean her iron. And I agree, that's very important. Currently my iron is a little dirty, but I really should pick up some Easy Off to make it nice and clean again. If you want more tips on how to make your sewing more polished, you can check out this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!